now, welcome back to the show for all your podcast glory, movies, TVs, and video games. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to NMI When You Need More Info, a podcast exploring the worlds of movies, video games, and TV shows. I'm your host, Nate, and yeah, it's great to be back today. Obviously, we do a little bit of an intro at the start of the episode. I'm going to roll into our other co-hosts now, but just before we go off, maybe you can email us in a bit when we give you the details. What song I was trying to mime, and if you did catch it before I'm about to ask my lovely co-host today, because I bet one of them might have got it at least. So, yeah, but onto that, though, I'd like to welcome back Chaz, Fergus, and James. How are you guys doing today?
Hello.
Yeah,
I'm
doing
okay.
pretty good.
I hope the one that you thought would get it wasn't me, because I have no idea.
Do you guys have any idea?
Yes.
No idea at all.
It's all on
Troll.
Fergus.
So, I mean, like, what was that?
Trolls.
Why
Was
the
it
fuck would it
Tron?
be? I said before the episode started, this movie was almost 20 years old.
Oh,
Do
That's
it
the
again, do it
hint.
again. Do it again.
Hey now, welcome back to the show for all the movies
Something
and
I really don't
podcasts.
care for. So,
Ghostbusters.
No, a movie. So you've never watched Lord of the Rings?
Oh,
shit.
um,
I did not recognise that
Hey
from Lord of the Rings.
now, come
I
to
don't-
Journey's
No.
End.
Clearly, I don't know.
no.
Return.
Lord
It's
of the Rings
return.
is
It's
worth a
it's literally the end of Return of the King.
No, it's the
Okay.
end of it. That's why I don't
Into
care
the
about
West.
ending. That ending goes on way too long.
Yeah, maybe the
Plus, the
extent. Okay,
films are
the normal
fantastic,
version.
but
Yeah.
The very ending of the film goes on too long.
The fact I watched those movies in one day, the extended editions in one
Yeah.
day,
Ah.
I made them. I started at 1. I went into town. I thought I'll get some lunch and I'll come back and watch the movies. I thought, the extended editions, I'll give that a watch. Then I ended up watching all of them till like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I forgot how Return of the King is 4.5 hours long.
No one made you sit through all of those. You chose to do that.
Yeah, but once you start Fellowship and then you hit Two Towers, it's like the journey. You've just got to finish it by that point.
I've never had that problem, man. Like, they are good movies, don't get me wrong. I fucking love them, but I'm very
So-
much a watch one extended version and then.
Hungover on a Sunday, just got some food in. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You're not tempted to just crack on Lord of the Rings.
No, because I have Civilization 6.
Okay, we'll be probably talk about Civ 6 in our games
Yeah,
episode.
we might
But
do.
yes, no. So, but yeah, it's great to be back, people. Obviously, with NMI, when you need more info, we like to do discussional topics, reviews, all the lovely things that we had in recent weeks. Myself and Fergus have given you our Puss in Boots review, and also villains that deserve a franchise. And it was interesting because myself and Fergus sort of went the yin and yang in that episode. Fergus went the more twisted, fucked up, dark route, and I went more the redemption route. It was quite interesting.
See, right, I was thinking about joining that one, and I was thinking about villains. I was trying to think of villains, and I was like, shit, either they've already had their own spin-off, like One Division was one of them that came to mind, or they're going to.
that was
It
a
was
problem.
difficult.
There
Yeah,
is.
but the thing is, though, like there are plenty of franchises which have, like, I spoke about Frankenstein myself, and that's already had it's had a few interpretations, like from Van Helsing, and even a movie which we discussed in the episode. Lucifer is another one. Judas, is another thing. But I do like the fact that Fergus went into Atom Smasher from Cyberpunk.
Yeah,
That was an
I-
interesting one.
There are some quite niche villains who do have a lot more story to tell. I think it's quite hard to find them out of the entire of media. I only came up with 3, and that was a challenge. But I think there is some mileage there.
I realized, like, thinking about it now, your shows were essentially like Breaking Bad, from good to bad, essentially. Like, you had like the Breaking Bad type effect on your shows, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so. Or certainly a change of perspective for some of them. Like, a lot of them are definitely always the villain, but like, they're quite nice and being a bit bad, to, oh no, they're being absolutely terrible, sort of dissension.
Oh yeah, no, most definitely.
Thing.
And also, like, at least you got to be Adam or Fergus Smasher. Does that sound Fergus Smasher?
Yeah. Fergus
Yeah,
Smasher.
no, yeah.
That was a good one.
And then you also got to be, who did you get to be?
I get a big Tom Thumb.
Yes. And I don't know
Yay.
if many people noticed from the promos, but what I tried to do is, with my checkered shirt, is make it orange to try and match Puss in Boots. fur, because I thought that'd be quite funny to do, to be honest.
Wearing puss's fur.
Yes, that is a line to say the least, to be honest. I actually wanted to put in like the Zorro style effect with NMI ripping into the screen, but that would have taken me a lot more time to figure out. Maybe for a future episode when we maybe get put to the future. And speaking of futures, we'll get into that. Our main topic this week is going to be, as you've seen from the titles, how do you make what makes a good sequel, essentially, but we're not just going to get into like, what great sequels there are. We're also going to talk about like, what makes a good sequel, but what can a movie do to become very bad and then maybe have a redemption at the end of it. But before we get into that, I'd like to have a little bit of a roundup so how everyone's been, in the last week's fans seen you. So Chaz, how you been yourself, man?
I've been good. On the random roulette wheel of random shit I've decided to play. I'm on Classic WoW again, but I'm doing something called the Hardcore Challenge, which basically means that no clue, I know, but basically it just means that you have to level as far as you can without dying, which is quite difficult to do in regular WoW, and I'm a bit hooked. And I've also been, or before that, I was playing Darkest Dungeon. It came up on our looking forward to 2023 episode because the second one's coming out. Speaking of sequels, and I'm trying to finish it, again, finally before the sequel properly comes out, rather than being on early access.
No, it's awesome. Like myself, like I've actually just repurchased Dying Light 2. So that's also been verified for Steam Deck now. So I'm going to be seeing how that actually plays on Steam Deck. I think it'll be quite interesting to do. I'm also replaying Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order because Jedi Survivor comes out in a few weeks, and we'll be definitely talk about that in our games episode. But and also repurchased all the Wolfenstein games. I've actually purchased a lot of legacy games, including Titanfall 2, which we'll get into our games episode as well. But Fergus, how about yourself, man?
I have got really, really, really into City Skylines. It's something of an old game, but if you've been watching the game news recently, you will have seen that Paradox and Colossal Order have announced City Skylines 2. But they have decided they're going to release all of their backlog content into City Skylines 1 before they get down to City Skylines 2. So there is a huge amount of content. There's a huge amount of modding going on as well. So if you're into City Build, it's City Builder on steroids right now in City Skylines land. So very enjoyable.
What's interesting about a sequel to a game like City Skylines, and pretty much any game that's got a lot of DLC, is how do you top the game, when inevitably your sequel, at least at first, is going to have a lot less stuff in it, inevitably.
So this is addressed in the trailer. They make quite a big point of it's going to be different. We've already done this kind of city builder, but we're going to make it hyper HD and realistic. So they're adding more game features, stuff you can't add as a modder or a content creator. So it's going to be a lot more than just new buildings and ways to make roads, by the sounds of it.
See, that's quite a good way, if you have a modding community, to do a sequel. You bring in what fans have kind of modded in anyway. You do your own take on it. You do a polished version, hopefully, and that way, you know that it's going to be received well. RimWorld does something similar, not with sequels obviously, but with its big expansions. They make the most popular mods basically as content within the expansions, and that way they know that it's something that people want.
So Colossal Order actually sell modders content as DLC packs.
Oh,
which is an interesting one. It's
Isn't that Bethesda though?
You could have bear in mind.
Bethesda tried to do it.
Colossal Order are a much smaller studio than Bethesda's. So there's kind of help sort of relationship going on there, rather than
there was another, like, was it a shooter? I believe it was a shooter that was selling skins or whatnot, something like that. I can't remember the name of the shooter now, but there have been a few companies that have gone in and
TF2
mod. I mean, that is true. Yeah, TF2 probably one of the first ones that did it, actually, to be honest. No, yeah, I was actually going to mention, like, mods being implemented into the video games. I'm thinking Skyrim and also The Witcher 3 most recently. The Witcher 3 HD next gen version took a lot of mods that was created by the community and implemented it. Some that they've had to remove, and because they kind of got through the mod wall, which shouldn't have happened. But yeah, no, it's nice. It's interesting they've used the community's work to actually like improve the game itself. Of course, there were a lot of PC just performance issues in general with the next gen version, so I haven't touched on myself yet. But it's nice to see games pushing for that essentially now. Integrating people's feedback and also ideas into the game itself.
Absolutely.
No, James, how about yourself, man?
Yeah, been pretty good. Finally picked up Marvel's Midnight Suns every weekend since it was on the Steam Easter sale or Spring sale, whatever it was.
And how are you finding it?
I'm liking it. It's good. Spending a lot more time in the Abbey than in the tactical part of the game, which is not quite what I initially thought when I picked it up, but I am still nonetheless liking it. It's very much like an RPG with kind of like tactical, kind of like card-based combat as like a side bit to it. Did you
go for the male or the female protagonist?
Male.
How are you finding the voice acting for that, by the way, for the main character?
Yeah, no worries. So I was saying that I felt that maybe it was given a benefit of doubt that maybe the flat performance was done on purpose so that the player can imbue their own personality onto the character, as opposed to the character being a more defined characteristic. And I was saying that I believe the original Deus Ex was intentionally acted the same way, with that same thinking. Although obviously, so that's my thinking as to why that might be come across as a little bit flat.
I feel like most of the time, flat voice acting is not on purpose. Deus Ex probably did do it on purpose, but yeah.
Sorry. I was going to say, to be fair, the very first Deus Ex was back in the day where all voice acting was almost all voice acting in video games was universally terrible. So 2000 was original Deus Ex. 90s video game voice acting was generally pretty bad. So
I mean, when it comes to that though, like I think we're in the 2020s now. Like Mass Effect today, when they came out, like 2008 2012 period. Like Commander Shepard did have a decent voice acting that was both. Dragon Age is exactly the same. I think like for myself, I felt like the wording was kind of fine, and it did again. You have mentioned how it was very aged. Their dialogue was aged, but I just felt like yes, their talking is like this. It's very generic responses, and there was no heavy emotion within it. Which was my biggest thing. Don't get me wrong, I've played like 120 hours of that game, and I still haven't actually finished the last couple of missions. I can also say they've released Deadpool for it.
I've got Deadpool. I'm not going to complete the whole thing. I'm not going to go too far into the story, to be fair, for like another month until the very last DLC pops, which is I think Storm. So I've actually got Deadpool, and I can recruit the other two DLCs which have been released, which is Morbius was released yesterday.
Which wasn't announced at all. They literally just wouldn't have Morbius. It's Morbin time. Honestly,
so I'm hoping to get more into my campaign before I actually plow on through the story.
I think that's the reason why I did it as well, because I knew I was like 2-3 missions before the end, so I was like, yeah. But no, I said myself. I was just playing. I'm just playing a lot of games with them just to try and catch them up essentially. And obviously, Resident Evil 4 remake comes out this Friday, and so I'm definitely looking forward to that. So that's going to be very interesting indeed.
We also have the Diablo 4 beta coming out.
Yes.
Beta. So yeah, I've said it again in my 2023 video. Those are two games that I want to kind of watch carefully in terms of what the reviews say. But I'm hoping they both get favourable ones, because I'd like to play them both actually if they aren't disasters.
Well, I know Connor from the podcast has been playing it, and he definitely had some positive words for it. So that is very good, to say the least. So obviously this week, people, as mentioned before, we are going to be doing movies that, how do you create a good sequel for a movie? And the reason we're doing this week, we're also doing games next time, is the lovely Mr. John Wick comes out this week in the world. The longest of the Wick franchise, almost 3 hours now, which is like ridiculous to say the least. I've just read an article that they had to cut the movie down for 3 hours and 45 minutes. So that is powerful. And obviously, bit of sad news. we can mention in this segment as well. Obviously, you know, the passing of Lance Reddick last Friday, which is really sad to us at age 60. It's not been officially confirmed what he actually passed away from, but from what it's been read, it seems like natural causes. Obviously, the actor, he's been in like The Wire and Fringe and like all these. He was in the Resident Evil TV show. You know, he was a massive gamer as well, Destiny 2, and also like, you know, Horizon Zero Dawn's Horizon Zero series. You know, such a powerful actor. If you heard his voice or seen his presence in anything, he was a brilliant, amazing actor. And the world's going to be a little bit sad that now he's not in it, to be honest. It came out of nowhere, to be honest. But, you know, let's celebrate the man by talking about, like, you know, what makes a great sequel. And I'll be honest with you, the John Wick series, him being the manager of the hotel and kicking ass in the third movie, showing us how badass he is a great way to talk about it this week. So obviously, rest in peace, Lance Reddick. It was great to have you here. And we're now going to get into our main topic of the episode. And it's going to be an interesting one this week, because this is going to be a very much discussional episode, because we've all gone, let's do this topic, and we've just pulled up a lot of sequels for movies, and we're just going to have a general conversation about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the room, the digital room, as it were, and we'll get a few roundabout thoughts about possibly who may want to chime in, and we'll go into that. So does anyone want to, you know, cut off first by, like, let's say, like, how do they feel like what makes a good sequel to a movie, essentially?
So do you think what makes a good movie? What makes a good sequel? So there's a few things I'm going to look at. I'm going to take an example of the action movies as from my first point. So one thing which actually kind of, I don't know if it's controversial or not, something that frustrates me a little bit, is that I feel that some making movies, they feel that they need to keep upping the stakes in the sequel. That sequel needs to be more bombastic. The stakes need to be higher and higher and higher. I.e., it's not just for, like, to take the Marvel series, for example. It's not just about kind of like, oh my God, the world's about to end. Okay, in that case, the universe is now about to end, and it just keep getting it bigger and bigger and bigger. But for me, more personal stories, what's better? No Way From Home. I know a lot of people like that, for instance. That was a more personal story, and bringing those stakes down, but centering those stakes around your central characters, making it a more personal story. That's what makes a good sequel, to my opinion.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. For myself, you know, when it comes to like me getting on the nail on the head in regards to not always going bigger, I think there is a flip side to that in regards to not always going bigger, because the two movies I'm going to talk about very briefly, we'll probably talk about them a bit more, are Aliens and Terminator 2. And ironically, both directed by James Cameron. Obviously, the first movies had more of a like Terminator, the first movie is more of a stalker movie, and the first Alien movie is more of a, like, you know, close space horror movie. Both of them take it to a bigger scale, but also adds a bigger world-building action to it. Even though it's more action-based, it brings a lot more characters and brings a lot more drive to it. You know, but then you do get the idea of, like, you know, is going too big an issue? For me, I'm thinking about talking about the Fast and Furious franchise is one for me. That franchise, I don't know how it's still doing so well as it is now. Like, it's going into Fast 10. And then there's Fast 11 coming up, which is finishing the entire, as they've said, they're finishing the entire, like, thing going forward. I don't know how these movies do it sometimes, but then you do get sequels which are fucking awful. Like, you know, let's talk about, I don't know, Starship Troopers. It's one thing I always say. Starship Troopers had an amazing first movie, satirical, gory, violent, but funny. The sequel was literally set within 2-3 rooms in a closed space, and was fucking awful. The third movie had a heavy Christian bias towards it and everything, and really cheesy montage music, but they had robots in it, so I gave the last 5 minutes a giveaway. But when it comes to a good sequel, though, I think one of the best film series that's gone on almost as long as, like, you know, Mission Impossible, because I don't count James Bond as like a movie sequel series, because they're more anthology style movies essentially, is the Mission Impossible franchise. I think they've done an amazing job at it, to be honest.
So just to pull you up quickly on James Bond things, there was a point with one of the James Bond films which backs up my opinion, and one of my favourite James Bond films is Skyfall, and that's, unlike most of James Bond films, is a more personal story where the stakes are centered around a character. It's not a big world-ending story. It's about someone trying to kill M.
And I think I actually stopped at Skyfall. I never saw Spectre or No Time to Die after that, which is was there two more? Was it only just Spectre and No Time to Die after that?
You're right. It was supposed to.
Mm.
I was a little bit mad about both of them, to be fair. But Skyfall ended at Skyfall. It's great.
Yeah, no, definitely agreed.
So, taking it from a different angle, I think you can make sequels so long as the movie world that you have created has enough mileage in it. So you can make sequels pretty much infinitely for Lord of the Rings, Batman, Star Wars, because it is that much of a created universe. Like, it may as well exist in real life. There's so much going on in it. So it doesn't really matter who you follow or what you do, so long as the character is interesting and the world is of interest to people. Like, not much happens in the Hobbit trilogy, sequel to prequel to Lord of the Rings, but that doesn't really matter because it's you inhabiting the world of Lord of the Rings, and they're all characters who are doing Lord of the Ringsy sort of stuff.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm just looking at the return. Speaking of Lord of the Rings, I'm looking at the Rotten Tomatoes best sequels of all time. List, and Return of the King is number 33. That is way too low in my opinion.
I saw Return of the King at least 13 times in the cinema when it came out.
Jesus Christ!
I had a lot of friends, and everyone was like, "Oh, have you seen this?" And let's go see this. It was just the movie of the time. So for, I guess it's been 6+ weeks, I'm going to see it multiple times a week because people wanted to see it again. Yeah, I mean that was a monumental film.
I mean, I still have to tell the story of my mother taking us to the cinema, and she read the original books in one print like they used to do, and we got to the fellowship, and she thought like it was the entirety of the books, and said, "Oh, there's too much," and she stood up in the middle of the cinema. What the fuck? Like, she shouted out loud because she didn't realize there was going to be 2 more of these movies essentially, and even though she should have known that since she read the books. But yeah, that was quite hilarious to me, to be honest. Like, another film franchise that did so well from its sequels. We have to say it, the Harry Potter franchise is a film. 7 movies. The final 2 were split into 2, and I believe that was one of the starting points where movies did start getting split into 2. Essentially, like,
yeah, it was the first one to do a part 1, part 2. Given how big the books were, I don't think they had much choice to do that. I think some films that came before should have done that.
It's funny though, because the one they split in 2, the last one, is not the longest book. I believe that's
Order of the Phoenix. Order of the Phoenix.
Yeah, true. There was a lot to wrap up. I don't know. Yeah, they finally felt they could take a risk. I don't know.
I mean, no. I mean, like it paid off for them, didn't it? Until it came to the Fantastic Beasts movies, which we weren't really going to. Because
this is a good point, actually. As soon as they got off like main book territory, the whole thing started to fall apart. Really.
Well, I actually didn't mind the first movie. I liked the fact that it was this character helping animals and everything, but then it turned into the literal Harry Potter prequel movie with Dumbledore and Grindelwald, and it was sort of like you had this great idea of like all this like Nifflers and everything, like trying to protect all these magical creatures. Entirely new, fresh. But you could have Dumbledore in there because it was the correct time period.
Yeah.
But why did they have to? And then look at the franchise now; it's gone.
Yeah.
It's a good point to make, actually, because a lot of films, especially last 5 years or so, try to basically mimic the previous success without really having their own original take. So Star Wars has kind of done that. Harry Potter, as I was saying, is another example, and those don't really stand on their own 2 legs, and it kind of feeds into what I think makes a good sequel, in that you can increase the stakes, it can work, but I think the best thing is I kind of agree with what Fergus said. If you have an interesting world, expand on that, explore more of the premise of the movie, of the characters, of their backgrounds, and explore, basically, like, you can try new things and you can try other grounds, as long as it kind of goes in with the spirit of that franchise and what people like about that.
So going off a film franchise, which I think which did really well, and people still, I praise this movie as much as I can. It's the Planet of the Apes trilogy that came out in the last 10-15 years. The first movie, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, was an interesting movie. It was James Franco. Andy Serkis portraying Caesar. It was a very interesting take. It was the first realistic take of apes in CG. And then it was seen as a good movie, but it was when the sequels came in that people started going, "Oh, this trilogy is fucking brilliant." Like I believe they've just finished filming the 4th movie, like which is set like way after like Caesar. So even though that film franchise has gone off its own thing, because I know Matt Reeves has gone on to do the Batman films now. A new director has come on to do the Planet of the Apes movie, so it's very interesting, to be honest.
An interesting point. The titling of these sequel movies really got me confused. I didn't know what order to watch them in, coming in at all of them individually titled, because it's not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's Dawn of the Return of the Planet of the Apes, The Return of the Dawn of the Apes, who then went shopping, and like, what order do you even?
I want to see that movie.
I didn't even know where to begin with them, so I didn't.
Oh, apologies. So it was actually Rise that started off, then Dawn, then War, and it's going to be Kingdom.
It's a very good point, Fergus. All I knew was there was a series of films with Planet of the Apes somewhere in the title that looked cool. Who knows what the order is though?
As you've seen though, the next movie is going to have Freya Allen, who plays Ciri in the Witcher series. So interested seeing her in something else. No, yeah. So like, let's go around and say, do we have like some of our? I mentioned like one of my favorite film trilogies. We mentioned Lord of the Rings as well, or not just trilogies in general, but movies that just had recurrent sequels that were just really good, continued on. What films do you guys think about when you think about that?
So for trilogies, I'm going to go with Die Hard. Aside from 4th and 5th films, they don't count. They don't exist. They're not the original 3 Die Hard films. Now that is a perfect action trilogy and one of the reasons behind that for me is they are consistent with the John McClane character. Whereas I think 4 and 5 they go off track on that side of things. So yeah.
I would do want to interject there. Like I'm not gonna lie, I've only ever seen Die Hard 2 once ever. Like I've seen Die Hard 1 and 3 multiple times. I've got a friend who agrees that I actually prefer Die Hard 3 to Die Hard 1. Like I actually do. Like I actually think it's better. It's not like comparably better. I just think it's like better just a little bit more. And
Both very good.
Yeah, no, both absolutely brilliant. But when it comes to that trilogy, for me it goes 3, 1, 2, and 2 I've only ever seen once. So yeah.
It's not a trilogy, but looking at that list you just brought up, you reminded me of Logan. That's a fantastic movie, and I think it does what I was saying about where there is an interesting character in Wolverine, but the prequels or the movies that came before that, they scratched some of that surface, and some of the exploration they did was better than other stuff that they did. But Logan, it tried something new in the tone and the slightly more kind of serious adult nature of the movie. But there is an interesting thing to explore there, and it really nails it in my opinion.
No, definitely agreed. When it comes to Logan as well, I know they've said in the Deadpool 3 movie that's coming out, like how Wolverine's going to be in it. They've confirmed this, but they've said, "Oh, well, how does the timing work out?" Essentially, and they've said, like, "Well, this is a time travel movie, so Logan can still occur. It just, they're essentially that phase out." I'm just hoping with that happening, you're bringing Hugh Jackman out of retirement as Wolverine. How's that going to work to us after as you've said, Chaz? The pure amazingness of Logan, how good it was as a movie, and especially as an ending to the actual like X-Men Fox franchise, essentially. So it's very like interesting to see how they're going to bring him back.
Yeah, that's the trouble with ending for now on such a great sequel, such a great movie. If you're going to bring him back, that's a big set of shoes to fill. So yeah, that will be interesting. It doesn't necessarily have to be, as good or have the character as impactful. But you're always going to think of how good Logan was when you're watching his appearance in Deadpool.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'll actually admit, like, going on to like another film series that has like the sequels have been brilliant. We haven't really mentioned these yet, but it's the Toy Story movies. Like, that every sequel has been better than the last one. And I'll actually admit now, I've not seen Toy Story 4 yet, and I've heard it's brilliant.
Well,
I liked it.
So this was a point I was about to bring up, actually. When film series that are so good, they don't know when to stop.
Really?
Oh my god, it's the worst, most Toy Story 4 is the worst, most embarrassing attempt at a movie
Oh,
ever.
Yeah, but
See,
Fergus,
it's kind of a hot take again.
so they rounded up Toy Story in Toy Story 3. They've quite clearly had no intention of making Toy Story 4. And then someone comes along with a plastic fork and convinces them to bury the entire series.
I like
the
it.
plastic fork.
Literally plastic fork, forky, yeah.
I mean, I did like Toy Story 4, but I would also be happy if they stopped with Toy Story 3, because I do agree with Fergus. It was a perfect ending. It was a perfect trilogy.
So you're going to hate the fact that they are doing a Toy Story 5.
No, I don't
Shame.
mind it. I was just say I like Toy Story 4, but
No.
Fergus liked it, yeah.
This happens a lot, especially again Shrek. Like Shrek 1, 2, 3, pretty good films. Now we're at Shrek 10, the Re-Shrekkening or whatever. Just completely lost any initial value
They're
behind
just
it.
Shrek with a franchise.
This is what I was going to say. Like, if there is more to explore, people are curious. If they successfully plant seeds or they have great material to work from, you can make a lot of good sequels, and people will be hungry for that. But yeah, knowing when to stop, that's tricky. And maybe they will keep making movies, knowing that they're not going to be the most inspired thing, because at the end of the day, brands have recognizable names, and people will go to see them. They can make money.
That actually brings back. Sorry, let me go back to Fergus first. I'll bring back to a point. Actually does link to that. But Fergus, you go first.
Well, this trend is already continuing with the 8 Avatar films that are scheduled, or 5, another 5 to go.
No. There's 5.
Just
so
5 total.
I could confirm, right? So basically, from what I'm aware so far, is that 2 and 3 have filmed. I believe they may have filmed a bit of 4 already. And then there's going to be 5. Now, obviously, myself and Fergus, we're probably going to do an episode on how, James Cameron needs to have a discussion with Nickelodeon at some point. But we won't go into that too much at the moment.
James Cameron at the episode.
But the Avatar movies, I'm not going to like, because Chaz is in Avatar 2 in 4DX, as I remember him saying. So that was essentially Splash Mountain going to see that movie. Have you?
For 3 hours.
Yeah, exactly. Have you, James and Fergus, have you guys seen Avatar 2 yet?
No,
I've not seen Avatar 1. I've not seen any of the Smurfs movies.
No appetite for it at all.
So I was actually going to bring up Avatar, Nate, because I don't know. It sounds like it's going to be controversial, but I really enjoyed 2. Really,
a lot of people have
liked it.
actually said that 2 is better than 1 for them, because it has a more whereas 1 was exploring the world more, just essentially building the world, and Jake Sully is more of a generic character. In the sequel, you actually get more into the gritty of family and also the children, because I've actually heard that the sequel is actually going to be passing over to the children more, essentially. So Jake Sully isn't going to be the main character going forward. So that's a very interesting way to go about it. And also, if you've seen the movie, you could definitely see how they're going to do that, because there's one character, which I've said to Fergus, that basically she is she's essentially the Avatar now. When you think about it, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I will say, I think James Cameron, everyone said, oh, how's James Cameron going to do Avatar 2? How is he going to come back after 13, 14 years? Do all these movies he's planned? It's not going to happen. And now he literally has the 3 highest grossing films ever now. Avatar 2 has made over $2 billion, I believe over $2 billion now. So, and the fact that do not bet against, because think about it, Terminator 2, Aliens, Titanic, all these movies, Avatar, all these movies, do not bet against James Cameron.
He knows how to print money. If nothing else. But yeah,
also,
so
pushes technology.
Yeah, and the thing, right? So the thing about Avatar for me, both of the films, in the first one, they set up for me a really interesting world, a really cool premise, and they laid down a lot of groundwork. And in the second one, they just went for it and they expanded it. But the thing is, for me personally, there's more. There is more that I'm looking forward to seeing. Even if literally it's just showing all of this imaginative world that they've built. I love that sort of stuff, as you know. I love a good world building movie. So for me, there's a lot of room to expand there.
So I can say, Chaz, you'll love this. We've just discussed this show before. Corridor Digital, their VFX episode. They did an episode recently on the breaking down of Avatar 2 and how that worked out. Turns out that some of the filmic elements in that are actually CG, and then also some are live action. But how they did it is so well done that you literally cannot tell the difference, because I thought it was real. So, but I think like sometimes sequels are interesting in that regard, because you have sequels that push into a new genre. You have sequels that push it into new action spaces. People also push new names, like new actors who appear in sequels and get bigger from sequels. Like, let's talk about a character from a movie sequel, which was great in my opinion. The CG was terrible, but Dwayne Johnson, he was introduced as the Scorpion King in The Mummy Returns. That was his film debut, and that was his progression to who he became. And then he had his own movie spin-off, the Scorpion King movie, and then that going on from there. And
then years later, he was in Moana. He was Maui.
Exactly. He
returned to his CGI roots, I guess.
I mean, that is definitely true. To be honest, he's now played a Scorpion King, a Tooth Fairy, and a demigod. So that's very interesting. But no, and then you have technological boosts for movies. So, sequels definitely provide an interesting haven for pushing the envelope essentially. And sometimes it doesn't pan out. Sometimes it really does. Another film I just want to briefly mention, we may come onto it after so many years, is Incredibles 2. That came out so many years later. I thought the sequel was brilliant, because also they flipped the story and put it onto the mum this time around. They changed the story around and how that plays out. Sometimes readapting your scripts and actually changing the perspective works out really well.
I really like how Incredibles 2 literally picks off straight after the end of Incredibles 1.
Yeah, no, I completely agreed. Chaz?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's kind of an interesting point, because we are talking a lot about sequels that do something different. Either, they're exploring a new part of the world, or they're, exploring a different part of the character, or they're revealing more about the main character, bigger stakes. But I wonder how many sequels there are out there that basically do the same thing but better. Can you guys think of anything like that?
I mean, I have to give it to the movies. We mentioned it before. The Fast and the Furious movies. They've essentially become the same thing. They fight the villain becomes part of the family, they go on to the next villain, and so on and so forth. You got to remember, the first Fast and the Furious movie is them stealing DVD VHS combos out of the back of a truck, and now they're fighting super agencies, government, and they're going into space. Double Toasted has made a joke. Yeah, no. The last movie they went into space in a car. Double Toasted has made the joke on their podcast where basically, obviously, Universal owned Fast and the Furious in Jurassic Park. Imagine if the Fast and the Furious movies end we gotta go to this island, Dom, where they got dinosaurs, and it's just Velociraptors and Dom Toretto fighting each other, and there's a Velociraptor becomes part of the family, and just I don't know how mad that could get. Essentially, I mean, the end, Jason Momoa is the new villain for the next movie. They've had John Cena, they've had Dwayne Johnson, Jason Statham, all these characters in them, which even had a spin-off with Hobbs and Shaw. But I think the Fast and the Furious franchise is a multi-billion-dollar franchise now, and they've done so well for themselves. Unlike, I've got to go against it, but I've got to give them credit. But the sequels are not as good. The Resident Evil movies, those movies were made for about $330 million in total, but they made over $1 billion. That is pure profit for them. And the first two movies, I didn't mind the third one. I did a rewatch before the god awful Welcome to Raccoon City movie came out. One of the only movies I've ever given a 3 or a 4 to. But the first two movies weren't groundbreaking, but they were trying to stick close to the story. They tried to do as best they could. I thought Nemesis looked amazing. The third one went too far into the post-apocalyptic aspect, and then they just got stupid. But they still made money because people enjoyed them. How does that work? How can you make a film series that just keeps working?
I think there's something to be said for a film delivering exactly what you're expecting. So you think it's not going to blow my mind, or maybe it will, but you know what you're in for, and then you're like, oh, I fancy this. I'm going to go see this movie because I know exactly what I'm going to get.
Yeah, this becomes safe comfort food films. It's just
exactly
slightly updated now with backflipping cars.
I know we talk about Marvel a lot, but that's probably becoming a bit of an example.
So I mean, they are pulling back. They are pulling back on that now, though. They have stated this.
Do you count the Marvel movies as direct sequels to each other?
I mean, It depends what films you go for. I think if you have a crossover between characters, it works. But I think if it's standalone, like Guardians 1 and 2, they're sequels unto themselves. When it comes to the Ant-Man movies, I think they are sequels that roll into the other movies because obviously Falcon is in those movies. It is they do have a linking point. I think when it comes to the early Marvel movies, the problem is they are all interconnected. Even if it's the smallest thread, I'd say like, yeah, I think you'd have to do that to a degree. I think when it comes to like even Shang-Chi had connections to way back in the day, like our Marvel movies.
I don't think that necessarily makes them sequels, though. Personally,
true.
They're just kind of they're in the same universe. They're not sequels.
I guess, yeah. Universe movies don't really count as sequels to a degree. Then, so I bet Fergus is going to go on. Here we go. Right, let's turn over to Fergus now. Go on.
So I think every other version of this, they are sequels or prequels. So Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit is definitely a prequel. The Hobbit trilogy is definitely a prequel to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Same with Harry Potter.
I was just going to say, how would you classify Grindelwald? That doesn't feel like sequels, not direct.
Well, the same universe, the same characters. So it's the Dumbledore prequel origin quadrilogy, or however many movies they end up making.
Yeah, I do definitely agree there.
So they all become sequels and prequels of each other. Now, with the Marvel movies, they're all interconnected. They're all part of the same wider story, but they're not following the same main character, which is an interesting way to approach sequels and prequels, but they effectively are, because you need to watch previous ones to get future ones.
I guess the problem comes into that then is bringing the TV shows into it. I think this is a whole other discussion because I think
it's very complicated. Yeah,
I mentioned Marvel. I mentioned the M word.
Yeah, but no, it actually goes on to that. You actually mentioned it earlier, Chaz. WandaVision, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness does not happen without WandaVision. That's just plain and simple. And like I do have my reservations about that movie. To be honest, looking back on it, I'm not gonna lie. Like revisiting it, I do feel it could have been better. But it's still not a terrible movie because I've heard they are possibly bringing Sam Raimi back for the next one. It's rumors essentially. But I think when it comes to sequels like the Marvel movies, I think it's a very interesting topic because obviously we've got Guardians 3 coming out in about a month and a half time, which is actually the wrap up for this team of Guardians essentially. So I think that's a whole thing into itself, to be honest. Going off that though, like I do think DC is another one in regards to like, doing its sequels and how can you continue going down like a line that doesn't work out. So like you had Man of Steel, which was praised, which was, people enjoyed it. Yeah. Man of Steel, I thought it was a new take, but then Batman vs Superman came out and then Justice League. And they just didn't like, a lot of people praise the Snyderverse, like how it went. But a lot of people also came into the point of stating Superman is I'm going to go on my little tire now about Superman. Superman is a character of hope and bringing like value into the world. But in the Snyderverse, he became a dark character. But Batman was a dark character. So how do you have the balancing act there? And the sequels just essentially became muddled. And I think people were just also tired of that. Go listen to our superhero fatigue setting in episode, because also I think that's actually a conversation to have because Shazam 2 has just come out and that's only made like $60 million at the box office this weekend, which is
possibly even more so that episode.
Exactly, because the first movie I believe made over 100 million its first week. Now I do think COVID plays into this, but also like after watching Black Adam, which was very generic, there's rumors of how like there was rumblings behind the scenes of Shazam and everything. Black Adam are connected, but Dwayne Johnson didn't want that. So Shazam 2 and also the new James Gunn universe, or the DCU, sorry. A lot of people just weren't interested in seeing the Shazam sequel. Granted, also it's St. Patrick's Day weekend, so a lot of people were getting fucking wasted probably. But, the director has actually come out and said now he's leaving superhero movies behind now and he's going back to horror to experiment. Like, he's done some, he did the Annabelle movies and then he went on to superheroes. So again, I think this comes into the whole sequelitis thing of like, we're going into DC territory now where we're getting Aquaman 2, we're getting The Flash, and we're getting Blue Beetle, and that's it for this DC universe.
Shazam horror sequel.
I mean, have you seen the first Shazam movie?
No.
So there is actually quite some like fucked up like scenes that little kids should not see, like monsters eating people in a boardroom and like people getting like disintegrated on screen and everything, like slowly disintegrated, burnt out and everything, and like kind of fucked up. Like
Work.
and from a horror director, it was very interesting how they did that.
I was going to say, actually, it's an interesting point about sequels that completely change their genre, because some of them do. I was just looking for examples. The one you mentioned earlier, Nate, was Terminator 2, and Terminator 2 not. Well, yeah, Terminator 2 is a little bit because the bad guy from the first one becomes obviously the good guy, but Aliens is probably the most famous example, right?
Yeah, no, definitely agree. I mean, like, you know, also a film we haven't mentioned yet, which is a sequel to a degree, Mad Max Fury Road. Like,
Oh, yeah.
You know,
I
how
was going to bring that one up.
Yeah, Furiosa is essentially the main character of that movie, and Mad Max is more like a lot of people say it's more Furiosa's movie than Mad Max's because Mad Max is more of the he's the driving force, pun intended in that regard. But like, you know, Furiosa, and also Furiosa is getting her prequel movie, like, you know, with Chris Hemsworth in it of all people, and like Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa.
Yeah, and the thing is about Mad Max, right? So that's another example of a world which is a very interesting premise. It's been set up, but you know, budget and technology meant that it hadn't, I guess, probably hadn't been fully realized in some of the prequels. And then, you know, out of nowhere, this absolutely insane sequel movie just comes and blows everyone away with just wow, the scope and the vibe of it, and just, you know, it's an incredible movie, and I think it, even though it is a sequel, it serves as a very good introduction to that universe as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like, you know, it's going off of here. So looking at Mad Max Thunderdome, which was the previous movie to come out, the third one, that was 1985. The last one came out, and I know they've been trying to make a sequel to this movie for many, many, many years. But you know, when it comes to Mad Max Fury Road, I just love how when you go to see that movie, you do not expect what's coming. Like it's literally a literal non-stop movie. It doesn't ever really stop, and I think sometimes that works out really well for movies because I don't know, to be honest, like John Wick is, you know, with the movie coming out, John Wick is a perfect example of this. As soon as John Wick 2 hits, you could literally watch those movies, and it's literally the narrative does not stop throughout the entire series.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch them end to end, it would be pretty much a non-stop fight. Well, apart from the scenes where they do occasionally say words to each other and then shoot each other.
You mean the scenes where he's acquiring weapons?
Yes.
Oh yeah, again, bullets taken out. So another film series I want to talk. So actually, like talk about like how films can have a dip and coming back. Mad Max is actually a great example of this, and how like, you know, Thunderdome wasn't highly. It became very like theatrical essentially in the movies that came preceding it, and then the genre essentially changed, flipping on its head. You know, a film series that like has had a similar thing, but also spinning it off is the Rocky franchise. I don't know if you guys have really seen the Rocky movies at all. So obviously there were 6 Rocky movies, and there's been 3 Creed movies now. You know, it's a spin-off of Apollo Creed and everything. And Michael B. Jordan has just recently a directorial debut of Creed 3. And the Rocky franchise went from, you know, Oscar-winning writing first movie that Sylvester Stallone won the Oscar for, to very like satirical, over-the-top, bombastic, to him having like, you know, brain damage and not being able to fight anymore, then coming back in Rocky Balboa, and then he could fight again as an old man, and then bringing Creed in, like, you know, the offspring of Apollo Creed, the previous movies, to go off this entirely offshoot of a franchise. And Creed 3 has done extremely well. Like, you know, people are loving this franchise now because it's doing something different. Like how like Michael B. Jordan was influenced by anime growing up. Like he's a massive anime fan, and he's actually come out and said, I believe there's quotes on the internet of him stating he'd love to have a crack at a Naruto or a Dragon Ball Z movie, like adapting those into a movie. Because when you watch the Creed movies and also Black Panther, he puts a lot of influence into his character set. How like his character in Black Panther, a lot of people have recognized, and there's rumors of this, of how his armor is actually based on a character from Dragon Ball Z, like him trying to bring influence into the character, bring a new style and approach to the narrative and everything. But that's just a franchise that has a dip and coming back and everything.
Crossover sequel where they have to box each other to gain some balls to take to a dragon to gain a wish.
Okay, that's.
I wonder where you were going with that for a second.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
I mean, let's spin on its head for a bit. So obviously, we have film sequels that didn't play out as well, to be honest. So let's talk about Tron. Actually, Tron Legacy. We mentioned Tron Legacy before. I didn't mind the sequel because actually think people do not mind the sequel for one reason, and Chaz may know where I'm going with this one reason. To be honest,
Daft Punk.
Exactly. That's the reason why that sequel works, in my opinion. And that's my concern for the third movie, Tron Ares. Is two concerns: Jared Leto, who I'm sick of, and no Daft Punk.
Yes, Tron's an interesting one. I think that the original Tron was very much it should have been on its own because it was basically just a product of the technology at the time, for the most part. Just showing it was unique because no one had ever seen anything like that. And I think that's a lot of the reason why people don't necessarily like the sequel, just because you can't recapture something like that. That being said, I think it's an interesting enough movie. Again, the visuals are pretty cool and the soundtrack's awesome. It's just not going to recapture the lightning in the bottle that was the original Tron. And that's probably why people didn't like it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird message as a sequel to basically say, hey, don't you remember when things were unique in the 80s? As a sequel, as a direct copy of you think that was unique in the 80s. I barely remember the sequel. I'm surprised they're even making a new.
Yeah, I had no idea.
One.
Sorry, Chaz.
I was just going to say, I agree with you. I'm not sure where they could go with that. I mean, maybe it's been a little while since the previous one, so maybe they could just show us some cool visuals and cool audio again, and maybe that'll be enough.
I'm not gonna lie though. I don't know. I believe Jared Leto was in the previous movie, but at the same time, I'm kind of over Jared Leto, to be honest. After Morbius, sure, and some of the films he's been in recently, they've not been great. Give us an up and coming actor Garrett Hedlund. He wasn't up and coming actor as much. But at least they tried something different, with that, a different actor and everything. And the Tron sequels, I always had this vision in my head of if you've seen Revenge of the Sith, of Anakin and Obi-Wan fighting over a lava pit, I thought maybe a digital pixel lava pit, volcano and everything, fighting across it. How the world's corrupting and going to virus and everything. Just something, something visually different in my head. But again, it's called Tron Ares, supposedly, and they are working on it. I don't know how it's going to play out. Though there is a Tron video game coming out, a visual novel coming out in April. So I'm actually looking forward to that, to be honest. Fergus, visual novel, you say?
Yeah, maybe we can do another episode on visual novels. I've got much to say about visual novels.
Oh, you should talk about Doki Doki Literature Club.
Doki Doki Literature Club, and I recently discovered a visual novel that will help you file your US federal tax return because it's too boring.
Very useful here in England.
Yes, we can expand on that subject on a later episode because we can go for ages.
Yes, no, that's fair. No, so. One film franchise, so we've talked about better film franchises that's coming back and everything, and actually did get better, but wasn't an exact sequel. Let's talk about the Transformers movies, or let's call it the grey metal movies, essentially, and how they became very who the hell was fighting who in those movies. To be honest,
yeah.
All I have to say about that is I feel like that's a good example of going in and knowing exactly what you're going to get.
I don't know if you've seen the trailer to the latest
Rise of the Beasts, sponsored by Porsche, with a exclusive trailer dedicated to them just driving around as a Porsche. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it looks different.
It's an absolute cash grab.
Isn't it based off of Beast Wars or Beast Machines?
Yes. Yeah. Optimus Primus. Yeah.
I haven't seen this trailer, but I really liked that series growing up. So
I can say, no, you got to give them this, Fergus, though. The visuals, at least you could tell what each Transformer looks like this time. They are uniquely designed this time.
Yeah.
Because they are massive apes and pterodactyls and everything.
There's that, I guess.
I mean,
Transformers should have stopped a while ago.
I've never fully seen. I've heard Bumblebee was very good. It was very 80s. It went to more the Gen 1 style and everything, and I've heard it was really good.
The first 2 or 3, yes. I don't know what number we're on now. They've stopped numbering them.
I mean, I think Wahlberg was in 4 and 5. I think I saw 5 and I was like, what the fuck is going on here? But I heard Bumblebee was quite good. I thought it was very interesting how that played out.
Yeah. They should have left that one behind a while ago.
I mean, when it comes to a film sequel though, how can we've spoke about like the different technology going into different rise of actors and everything, like bringing new people in, like how it plays out more, like how I don't know how to phrase this. How do we feel if you're going to make a sequel to a movie for yourself? Let's say there's a film coming out. We've discussed like a film IP before, but is there any films that you feel deserve a sequel that could be done well? Like for myself, for example, I still stand by this. I still think Terminator could get a good sequel as long as it's done correctly and not like too over the top. I think it needs to go, but essentially taking the approach of what we discussed before and how it needs to go back to its ground roots. Like it doesn't need to be over the top. It needs to care about it's about the characters and not the CGI. Essentially, I think that's what Terminator needs.
In a world where we have an awful lot of sequels, that's quite a hard question to answer. Actually, I've got to think.
Exactly, yeah.
Because there's definitely like a lot of abandoned franchises or stuff that just made one thing, and maybe we were itching for more.
So that's the thing with how many sequels we've had in the world today, and there's also there's literally the term now, sequelitis. Like we're in a world now where a term called sequelitis has come out. I just have an idea.
So I'm currently scrolling through a very long list of sequels that are going to be released in 2023. Epic hits like Magic Mike's Last Dance.
I've heard that's quite good, to be honest.
The Evil Dead Rises.
That's been getting amazing reviews.
Mm.
I mean, also you've got a film that Chaz is very much looking forward to coming out in June, Across the Spider-Verse.
Yes, Across the Spider-Verse.
Oh yeah.
Indiana Jones. There's a new Indiana Jones.
That's going to be interesting. So how we talked about how a movie series dips and comes back, like the fact it's being directed by James Mangold, who did Logan. It's going to be interesting to have the Logan director doing the last Indiana Jones movie. It will be interesting.
Yeah.
Coming back to your question, like I very much like my buddy cop movies, all my favourite genres. So I'm thinking, I don't know if there's any of these sequels coming up. I don't think there are. I'd love to see another Nice Guys or another. Is it The Other Guys?
No, there's never been an announcement of those, and those were actually two. Like I was having a bit of a Ryan Gosling like lull because after Blade Runner and like a few of the movies where he played like the Drive, he played the same like sort of like quiet stoic character. I saw The Nice Guys and I was like, oh shit, he's really good in this, to be honest. Like him and Russell Crowe, I thought it was really good, and the Other Guys, I thought it was just fucking hilarious, and I'd love a sequel to that movie.
Yeah,
that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
See, the trouble is, right, I'm actually like looking through some lists, and I think this is a mistake that people make. They wish for a sequel just because like the original movie was super good, right? Which is fine, but sometimes movies very neatly wrap up their story and what they want to tell in that one thing, and you don't want to spoil that necessarily. If let's say it's like a really interesting world, or it's left a cliffhanger, or it's left a lot of open questions, or interesting characters you want to see more of, sure. But like a lot of movies just stand on their own. Because I was thinking, I don't know why Everything Everywhere came in my head, because obviously that's a really cool movie. But I'm like, that just works as its own thing. I can't think too much how you would expand that without just doing more. And maybe that's fine because it did a lot of cool stuff. But yeah, it's hard to say, to find a good sequel that's already not being made.
No, I completely agree. I'm just thinking of like films is like, let's a good example of a movie that a lot of people did not really expect to come out, but also I thought it was good. Blade Runner 2049. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it's not as good as the first one, because Blade Runner is it's not as good. I'm not saying it's bad.
I like the sequel.
Yeah,
I like the sequel, but Blade Runner is still better to me. Like, that's what I'm just trying to say, essentially.
So I saw Blade Runner, the first one, just a few years ago, and it was way weirder than I thought it was going to be, because all I'd seen was the dystopian imagery that came out of it, not the strange, dull stuff. And I really liked the second one. I think that is a good example of a great sequel, because again, there's a big amount of time that's passed, but they didn't try to they explore some new characters and they showed like new elements of the world and they expanded on some of the interesting stuff that the original did. So for me, I think that's a great example.
I would say, coming to the Across the Spider-Verse, Into the Spider-Verse did actually, like how was said, it did had an excellent wrap up to its story. Like he became this hero and everything. But it's interesting because because I know Across the Spider-Verse and Beyond the Spider-Verse, they are. So I know the sequel has been written as a love story. I know this time around and everything. No one knows how the final one's going to go. But if they could pull off these next two movies, which obviously, if the next one does well, the third one I think will pretty much do well as well, to be honest. Just trying to phrase that correctly. But Into the Spider-Verse is one of those movies where it's like that could have literally been fine by itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've done quite a lot of Jurassic Park, Jurassic World films.
I still have only seen the first Jurassic World movie, by the way.
Okay. This won't spoil anything. How about we do a film exclusively from the dinosaurs' point of view with no human intervention?
Isn't that just Dinosaurs, the TV show? Not the mama! Back in the day.
Except they don't. Except they don't talk. It's very experimental, and you just follow a group of velociraptors living their day-to-day life on the island.
I mean, just get a David Attenborough soundtrack, and isn't that just Planet Dinosaur and everything? Like,
You know what I thought?
Maybe.
Do you know those videos where they get a house cat and they attach a camera to its collar and you just see it like roaming around the neighborhood? I just thought of that, but with like raptors.
Yeah, that could be the film. I think.
Like,
I mean,
see raptors like climbing over fences and hissing at each other and.
No, that's fair. No, that's completely fair to us. So, another like coming out this year, like that's actually just. Sorry.
Before we do that, so I just want to go back to Chaz's point. We should do. I mean, I'm not a fan of the whole franchise, but it sounds like we should have an experiment with like having like a slasher film where it is all from the villain's perspective.
I mean,
listen to our villains episode for more.
Yes, yeah. Actually, we do actually talk about that. To be honest, yeah. So, going on the Scream franchise, actually, like I've only ever seen Scream 1 and 3. I've not seen 2. I haven't seen any of the rest of them. But I've heard the recent Scream movies are brilliant. Like they've redefined how to play out the slasher genre essentially, and how Scream 6 has gone to New York now. Unlike the Nightmare, no, it's not the Nightmare Before Elm Street. It's the Friday the 13th franchise, and how Jason eventually went. Jason Takes Manhattan. Essentially, that's essentially what it became, and then it became Jason X in space and everything. The running joke there. Now the Scream franchise has gone to New York. I've heard it's very good. I've heard the new Scream movie is very good. You do not have had to have seen the previous Scream movies. You should have as well, though, because it has links to the previous movies. But I know 7 was greenlit before 6 even came out, and it's coming out next year. So Scream 6 was already announced its release date when Scream 5 was only just in cinemas. And they were already starting to film the next one already.
Was there a gap in the Scream franchise for a while? There was, right?
Yes, there was, I believe. So you had Scream, and then you had Scream, which was like Scream 4, but they just called it Scream essentially. And then Scream 5 and 6 and 7 are coming out. And they are all linked essentially. So going off the time frame, yeah, so Scream was 96, Scream 2 was 97, Scream 3 was 2000, and then there was an 11-year gap, and then a 10-year gap between 4 and Scream. So Scream 4 and then Scream, essentially. The most recent movie, though, didn't bring back Neve Campbell, who was like, the main character Cindy from the franchise, because there was a contract issue there and a narrative issue. But that's a movie franchise that's supposedly done really well, to be honest, and it's interesting how it plays out.
Yeah, so one thing that just occurred to me is, at least recently as well, we're getting a lot of movies that are sequels, but from quite old franchises. I guess Mad Max is an example, but we said I just said Blade Runner, and I'm sure there's a lot of more recent examples that I'm forgetting. But some people would say that that's like a cash grab, or it could be like going off of brand recognition. And I was just thinking, it feels like there's a distinction between ones that are successful or at least critically acclaimed and ones that aren't, and that is finding that balance of respecting the original but doing something, building on it and kind of doing something new, because you're never going to capture the original like vibe of the time of those movies were made, if that makes sense. Whereas if you try to just kind of basically remake the old movies with from a nostalgia point of view, I feel like you haven't got any original ideas, and you're not gonna impress people and draw people in as much.
So
'Cause
now a
they-
lot of people. Sorry.
I was just going to say, because those movies still exist, and they're classics for a reason. You can still watch them.
So I know a lot of people have actually come out and said now that with the you know how like Asian representation is getting a lot better in cinema now. Like, you know, bigger movies are coming out now. We're getting like a Hangover style movie called Joyride, which is like all female Asians. Like they go to China and everything, and like it's a whole thing. It looks very funny. Actually, stars Stephanie Hugh from Everywhere All at Once, and also we had Crazy Rich Asians, everything. You know, Shang-Chi, which is great. We're having that now in representation. I'm trying to figure where I was going with this, to be honest.
I was wondering. I was
Yes,
like,
yes. So basically, how the Indiana Jones franchise is wrapping up with Harrison Ford. Launch off of that and give us that short round sequel. You know, Ki-Hu Kwan, you know, who's an Academy Award winner now. Give us a franchise where basically I've seen this on Twitter. He has to either go like he takes up Indy's mantle or what he's been up to in the last 30 years, or he's returning the items to the places that were originally found. So he's returning the items to, you know, that place. Now, short round the movie, you know, that could do quite well. You know, like, and it'd be an interesting spin-off for franchise. Fergus is like, could it? Like,
Well, okay. There's quite a few points here. Firstly, we are absolutely swamped with sequels of things that people have grown up with. This is very much farming nostalgia and giving people an excuse to not come up with or invest in new content or franchises. There's plenty of good new books being written. They could all potentially become their own film and TV franchises, but they're being overlooked for something that was once successful in the 80s, when the people who are now making them were potentially not even born. If we're talking farming the 80s content, looking at Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Transformers, etc. So you've got a lot of sequels who are being made by nostalgic, starry-eyed fans of things that they were never originally involved with, and it's corrupting the original material pretty severely and very fundamentally damaging the new content that is coming through or not coming through because we're being swamped by nostalgia.
Sorry, I was going to say, this is the point I was trying to make with, you know, if they're just trying to recapture what the original movie was, like, especially for an older one, it's kind of a product of its time, and if you've not got anything original to bring to it, more to explore with that franchise, then yeah, I think you are going to...
It's happening with Indiana Jones, really. Like, the original 3 were made by the same team at the same time, roughly speaking. The new 2, really, really not, kind of shows... And it's a bit like, hey, look, we got Harrison Ford to do a thing. Look, he's wearing the hat. Yay.
I mean, yes and no. I think, like, you know, Keeping the Crystal Skull, I don't like, you know. But
terrible.
The new one, like, I think, like, you know, Harrison Ford loves his character. And how emotional he was when he came out, like, talking about this movie. And how James Mangold, his previous movies, Logan specifically, can show a character at the end of his days, essentially, like, you know, that he's at the end point and how he could pull that off. And I think, and also like Phoebe Waller-Bridges is in this movie as like his goddaughter, Fleabag, and I believe she had some involvement in the script as well, and she's done some great, you know, narrative work.
She's done a lot of very good original stuff, but the fact that she's even paying into this is...
Well, no, but that's the thing, though. Like, you say that, but at the same time, you know, if something becomes like the whole sequel idea, something becomes stagnated, injecting new ideas from a different perspective can rejuvenate a franchise. Like, you know, Mad Max Fury Road. Like, you know, George Miller is the same director from the original days, but I'm sure there was, like, you know, new writers that came in to give a new idea. Like, you know, TV shows like do it nowadays, like, you know, reboots essentially, but they have like connections to the original. 21 Jump Street is a great example, like great comedy film duology, which is actually, if you think about when watching the movies, it's actually a direct sequel to the original movies or the original TV show back in the day. Like, you know, they have direct links to the original thing, and both those movies are really good. I think if you inject a new perspective into something, it could work out really well. I think that the problem is, though, like, you do get people who do just come in to pump out more stories, and I think that's also when it comes to like the Tremors 2 back in the day, or like the Jaws Revenge movies, like they were just trying to pump out sequels essentially back in the day. But I do think we get people nowadays who are very close to the franchise, like Dune. I know it's not a sequel per se, but Denis Villeneuve came in with a fresh idea on how to approach the Dune franchise, which they said was the unfilmable movie. Like, and he pulled it off, and we're getting Dune Part 2, and possibly Part 3. Blade Runner, going back to Blade Runner, did we need a 2049? And also, we're getting a 2019. 49 was, I thought it was a good movie. It was a very good movie. It wasn't as good as the original, but it was still a very good movie.
They could have done something similarly cyberpunky, but nothing to do with Blade
Okay,
Runner.
let me ask you this then. And you haven't seen the movie yet, Fergus, because you probably know where I'm going with this. Do you know a movie? Do you know a movie I'm going to talk about now?
I don't know which movie.
So, have any of you seen Prey yet?
No.
Any of you seen Prey?
No.
So
That
Prey
does
is
sound
Prey is the prequel movie to the Predator franchise. It's an hour and 30 minutes long by Dan Trachtenberg, and it is brilliant because it's a fresh new perspective on the franchise. I think that's how you can go into something. How James Cameron consistently, goes into, how everyone mocked him for Avatar 2, Avatar 3 and everything, but they're not mocking him now. The man was so confident in himself that he filmed 2 films at once, and he's going to knock it out of the park.
He's making money, but I don't think he's doing anything original for storytelling.
I disagree there because you haven't seen the sequel yet. So I think you haven't seen Avatar 2, and myself and Chaz have, and how we actually prefer the sequel to the original.
And the thing is, I'd argue that, at least with Avatar, good storytelling is not the forefront of what makes those movies good. I kind of agree. There's not a huge amount of really interesting new stuff going on with the storyline specifically, but that's not what I'm there for with Avatar.
I do actually want to bring up the point, John Wick. It's not the most you are not watching John Wick movies for the story, to be honest. You are watching it for the most badass. We are getting, from what I've read, we are getting car fu in the new movie, not gun fu, which was amazing at Equilibrium back in the day, but we're getting car fu. I think it comes into the point of some movies are built for story, some movies are built for the stunts, some movies are built for the set pieces, such as the Transformers movies back in the day. Even the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie got a sequel from Michael Bay back in the day because he just does bombastic. People sometimes go see for the director, essentially. What are they going to do? How, when it comes to Zack Snyder, a lot of people, Zack Snyder is a one-trick. People say he's a one-trick pony with his movies, but he's created some very visually interesting movies. James Cameron, coming back to the point, looking back at the 2 greatest sequels of all time, Terminator and Aliens, he changed the narrative up and everything. And I think when it comes to the Avatar movies, I think I would actually like to see you watch that movie when it does eventually come to. I believe it is out now, or it's close out soon to watch it available. And I would love to get your perspective on the sequel after watching it for almost 3.5 hours, probably. But I do think when it comes to sequels, it's basically it's a multi-tiered process into creating a good sequel. Because if you don't do it correctly, it can veer off very quickly. The Transformers franchise is a good example of this. Resident Evil franchise, whereas Fast and the Furious it is going into 11 movies. John Wick 4 and 5.
I mean, you can do good sequels, but having the attitude that a lot of producers seem to have of, oh, this thing did well this one time, let's make an infinite amount of them, despite not having enough material, is killing movies. I mean,
the Hobbit movies are a good example of that. How, The Hobbit was literally a singular book, which is 200, 300 pages long. And it was stretched out into 3 movies, which I'd say how going to video games for a second. God of War and God of War Ragnarok. When it was announced that the sequel was going to be the end of that entire story, people went, that's interesting, because usually you do trilogies for video games and movies, but they did the entire narrative in 2. I think the Hobbit movies could have worked in just 2 movies essentially.
Yeah, quite possibly.
I think you can stretch out stuff in the correct way. I think we're going to do a Last of Us episode soon, people. And I think the Last of Us TV show does an excellent job in injecting narrative into the show to expand the world. but is it in the content? So basically how it was said that it was content that was originally created for the video game that was excluded because it was going to be too bloated, and as a pun intended for The Last of Us. But when it comes to the show, some of the best content is the expanded stuff, like, stretching out essentially aspects which weren't there before. So I think if it's done correctly, yes, but I think you're definitely correct. Narrative is like an elastic band. If you pull it slowly enough, it will stretch quite far. But if you pull it too quick, it will snap, and it's stretching the contents essentially and breaking it.
Yeah, so there's things that have been going again. Like, I think the worst offenders are the reboots and continuation of the 80s era stuff, because the people acting in it, the people producing it, they're either very old and, as you say, coming to the end of their days and should probably retire. Controversial opinion about Harrison Ford. Or were never part of the original process, and it just becomes very, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of skipping over a generation of potential content creators coming up with their own potential franchises. Like, franchises should probably die after 20 years, really.
You say that, but like, when it comes to franchises, some of the greatest franchises have gone on for decades. I'll go back to Rocky, for example. That movie came out in 78, 79. We're now in 2023, and it's not. It's a sequel to a degree because it's within the Rocky universe. It's the Creedverse now, but it's now the 9th movie in this entire franchise. It had its slip ups with 3, 4, and 5. 4 and 3 are just like training montages. 5 is not great, but I think like injecting a new narrative into how, like, Creed was written by Ryan Coogler, and I believe it was directed by Ryan Coogler, who did Black Panther. And he came with this new narrative to the story, and he was a fan of the franchise. I believe he was a fan of the franchise, so he brought a new perspective. But he is our age, like,
he was the fan of a pre-existing franchise. Couldn't Creed have existed as its own entirely independent movie about boxers without having to refer to Rocky?
No, because it's literally about one of the sons.
Well, it doesn't need to be specifically that character, but you could effectively make the same movie about unrelated modern boxers.
But I think when it comes down to movies, though, sometimes with sequels, but I'll go back to Bumblebee, for example. The Transformers films had petered off. Like, people were kind of done with the movies. Bumblebee came out. It was set in the 80s. It followed more the old school style design of the movie, the characters. Haley Steinfeld was one of the main characters in it. There was John Cena in the movie. Again, I've not seen the movie myself, but it had more of a more heartfelt feel to it, and it looked more unique compared to the old movies. But it was a spin-off of the original franchise. And sometimes that does work. Like, having a spin-off, just because also sometimes, sometimes the narrative does drag out. Sometimes, you get to a point where you can't take the main characters anywhere. Take a secondary character and give them their own spin-off, essentially.
Counter argument: could that budget not have been better spent funding a entirely independent film where someone is super good friends with his car, like the next modern Herbie film?
True, but at the end of the day, is Herbie and
not directly Herbie, like a guy who does up his car and I don't know.
But let's ask you this, right? Sometimes it's the devil, okay? Let's put it this way, right? Sometimes to make a film great and very, very widely known to the world and like very publicized extremely well and does extremely well financially, it's got to be off the back of something that is previously well known. Like, sometimes that works out really well in regards to that. Sometimes it doesn't. We've had movies which I'm trying to think of movies which have tried to do this, like, but sometimes like it doesn't work out that way. Like,
they make money.
Exactly. I think it does just come down to how production companies approach this, and I think that's how a good sequel works. I think if people respect the franchise that came before and they understand the material, it can work out really well. I think when it comes down to, we'll come back to James Cameron again, but he pushes technology. He waited 13, 14 years to do the next Avatar movie because he waited to know when it was going to come out. Like, he actually filmed Avatar 2 and 3 back in 2017, 2018, I believe. Like he filmed it was 5. Yeah, Chad's like, okay, yeah, almost 5-6 years ago now. Like, you know, but he waited for the technology to catch up before he continued on. He's someone who waits for technology, and the narrative actually complemented that quite well. When it comes to other film franchises, Mad Max, for example, over 30 years between, you know, George Miller literally waited for the next good story. Like, you know, it all comes down to that, and I think that's how it plays out. To be honest,
The thing is as well, like I've been saying about these films are products of their time, right? It could be that you could literally be waiting for the point in culture where like a film in that franchise might be relevant or, you know, popular again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, you know, I think that's just how
A new
it plays
take on it, that is.
Yeah, I mean, like some films, like, you know, do work out. The Incredibles, 13 years. Jurassic World, I didn't mind the first one, 13 years. Dumb and Dumber 2, 20 years, didn't work out. You know, again, looking at here, so Mad Max Fury Road is 29 years later. Coming to America, the sequel, Blade Runner 2049, 35 years later.
I think the thing is, it really, well, it's hard to sum up stuff in such a little bow, but I think really the successful and critically acclaimed sequels are ones that, yes, they respect the original franchise, but they bring something new to it, and they don't just try to just capture what the other one has done and remake it effectively, you know, make the same movie again.
Kind of, but you get kind of stuck in a trap. Like, so in 20 years, do you think we're still going to be watching Star Wars and Harry Potter movies?
Yes.
Probably,
It's a franchise.
We are yes.
That's the thing.
So, we're very much still stuck in this world. We've not moved on. We've not created new worlds. We've not reimagined our existence. And we're talking 2 generations at that point.
I mean, the thing is, though, I do disagree with that because we like how Harry Potter came about. You know, Star Wars was around, but Harry Potter came afterwards. Lord of the Rings has been around since the 40s. And it came around again in 2000. Like, you know, franchises. Percy Jackson is another good example, and how like those previous films didn't do well. But they're redoing it now on Disney Plus, and they're readapting it, and then it's coming off the back of, you know, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, essentially. You know, we're getting a lot of TV shows now that do this. Really, like I think like Amazon is pulling this in. The Expanse, you know, great sci-fi franchise. Battlestar Galactica. You know, they're trying to do a Battlestar Galactica movie now, which is sort of linked to the original TV show to a degree. You know, I think we're always going to have these franchise movies. It's always going to be a thing. But I think film studios such as A24, Blumhouse, like, you know, we're getting our first ever A24 TV series soon. So that's going to be quite interesting. You know, like, you know, I think it's these independent film studios are coming out now, and they're actually expanding and getting more well known. And I think after such films as Everything Ever All at Once, The Whale, you know, all these recent movies, The Wreck-It, and also Blumhouse, you know, with all the amazing like, paranormal movies and everything. We haven't even spoken about horror movies such as Paranormal and everything, but they've created franchises into themselves. Like, you know, and I think that's going to be new franchises coming from independents, really.
I don't disagree with you, Fergus, by the way. I do think that we are in an influx of sequels and franchises and such. I mean, I don't have numbers. It feels like there are way more than there used to be. But I don't think that at the end of the day, I think, you know, quality films will always shine through, whether they are sequels or they're part of a franchise or they are something completely original, like Everything Everywhere. I don't think that sequels will completely stamp that out. I think that they are taking quite a big part of the pie at the moment in terms of film distribution, but I don't think that means that we will never get original stuff anymore.
I think, like, actually, to that point, in regards to the release of films, like, you know, sequels, you know, franchise films, technology plays into a big part of this now. Do you remember the days, like, how you'd have to wait a year for the video to come out after the film was at the cinema? Now, literally, we've got movies like Scream, which the films are coming out a year within each other, and then they're released onto digital platforms 45 days after release. You know, everything's coming a lot more quicker to produce. And also, you get to technology that's a lot easier to create movies now. Like, you know, it's I think technology is the biggest factor in regards to how you could do a sequel or how you could do a franchise and getting it out and everything quicker and cheaper as well.
You could just stream the original movies. Like there's so much historical content that it would take a lifetime to even watch. Like the BFI back catalogue, for example.
Let me ask you this though, okay, Chaz, you made an example of this. You saw 2049, correct? And did you see Blade Runner?
Yeah.
And then you saw Blade Runner after?
No, I did see Blade Runner before that. I did see the first one first.
So I'll admit, I actually saw Blade Runner after the first
Interesting.
movie, the sequel. But I had to put my brain into the mindset of basically the film for the time period, and I also saw the final cut and everything. There are films like Alien I saw after Aliens. I was Terminator 2, prime example. A lot of people saw Terminator 2 first, and because it was the bigger bombastic sequel, people more aligned to that. And you go back to the original, some people might not enjoy it as much because it's not what they expect it to be. Some might enjoy it more. The problem is with doing the idea that you suggested, Fergus, is that we're in such a world now of more fast-paced or more heavy CGI or even just the heavier narratives compared to the old days. People might not like them as much. Now, don't get me wrong. I think when it comes to stuff like animated movies, I think they're timeless to a degree. Your Toy Stories and everything, your Incredibles. I think they are timeless, and the 2D DreamWorks and animated stuff and everything. But when it comes to live action stuff, I think I think people nowadays aren't as inclined to go back.
If you're talking about them aging because of technology, yes, to some degree in some cases, but I think that sometimes the look that is part of the technology and the culture or whatever at the time, sometimes that is part of the movie in itself, and that is part of what makes it timeless, in my opinion.
There is one film I want to talk about briefly before we wrap up, because we've never actually mentioned this yet, how we're getting a Gladiator 2. So that's the film where, no, you say this, but Ridley Scott has waited, over 25 years to release this movie. It's been in the works for a long time. Now, Ridley Scott has been on a shaky trail of late, to be honest, with his movies. But it's getting Denzel Washington, supposedly, and Paul Mescal, who was the recent Academy Award nominee for Aftersun, which I've heard is a very good movie. No one hugely knows the narrative at the moment, but I think if Ridley Scott has waited 25 years, 23, 24, 25 years to make this film, it's got to be something great. Also, with Denzel Washington in the movie, he's usually in a lot of good movies, to be honest.
The Gladiator, in my opinion, is one of those films that is very well contained in itself. Yeah. So, yeah, I am
dubious,
skeptical. Yes.
Yeah.
Perhaps if they try to continue the story of the characters that were in that film, I don't know where that would go.
The son, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, but
because it would be the correct age if you think about it.
If you aged up. The son didn't really have any character, did he? Yeah, I feel like you can if you have the right resources and the right director, the right vision, you can make almost any movie good. But it depends what they bring from the original, right? Do they focus on the tone? Do they focus on, replicating some of the visual aspect? Do they kind of go for the same sort of story, or do they do something quite different? Yeah, it's very much with what choices they make in this one. It's not an obvious sequel.
There's no reason why Ridley Scott could not have made basically the same film that he wants to make, but has nothing to do with Gladiator. People would still see it because they would have seen, hey, it's Ridley Scott. That's a great guy who does great films. Let's go see it. There's no need.
The thing is, though, pulling it into context in regard to that, though, it could be called Gladiator 2, only because it's set within the time period, roughly. But they're only using that as a jumping point to go off. So it will have some links to a degree to the original movie, but it won't be a direct sequel. It's just been called that.
There's just no need for that even try to link it. I mean, you're potentially robbing, again, potential new ground to jump off from.
I mean, I just watched Gladiator.
Something completely different.
I mean, I just watched Gladiator for the recently, and that film does really hold up, to be honest. Many years later.
I saw it for the first time last year, and it's fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
There's nothing about that film that would make you think it's as old as it is. It's really fucking good. It holds up. This is what I mean about timeless. It doesn't necessarily have to have great technology or whatever. Classics are classics for a reason.
So I think we've actually got a good perspective there. So we've spoken about how when it comes to sequels of franchises, it all depends on possible pillars to actually build up a franchise, essentially. Technology, waiting, technology, time, new injection of like inspiration and everything to a franchise. I think it's not just one thing that makes a good sequel. I think like it depends what sequel you're trying to create. Like, if you are trying to rebirth a franchise, you need someone who's passionate about the classics and they know the franchise essentially. If you're wanting to have if you wanted to push your film technologically, like James Cameron, for example, you wait years, but then it turns out the narrative is better. Like, or, it could be like, Toy Story, for example, Toy Story 3. They waited 10 years to release the sequel. Toy Story 3 is regarded as one of the best animated films of all time for a lot of people. It's waiting, it's time. So it's a multitude of like factors that go into, or someone's come out and said like, listen, or it's dependent on franchise springboard. It's the idea of how, like, sometimes for one franchise to succeed, it needs to jump off the shoulders of another franchise. Like, that's how it works out. Like a sequel essentially that springs off into its own thing. I think that's probably a good way to wrap it up. Do you guys have any more wrapping up points before we finish today?
I agree with all the points you made there, more or less, but just to kind of play devil's advocate, I suppose, and kind of agree with Fergus in a way, it's fine a good sequel might just be a sequel and that's it, or maybe the film stands on its own and there is no way to make a good sequel for it, and people can just be happy with how it is because that film pulled it off so well. So I do think sometimes there are very obvious grounds for a sequel and there's lots that people are hungry for, and sometimes a film can just have one or two and that's its franchise and it's good and it's remembered and it does well.
Yeah, largely agree. It's possible to make a good sequel. There are needs for sequels. Being utterly dependent on being a sequel to be a film is frankly quite damaging. Some of the wider, more ongoing franchises, I feel, are probably robbing a generation of creators of putting new ideas and evolving culture out there. So we're going from good to also single-handedly responsible for cultural stagnation. And if we don't get out of this loop, we're going to be basically static as a culture for the next 20 to 50 years.
Can I just say, people, the nice yin and myself and Fergus again, always lovely to have.
And me being the mediator.
So I'm just going to wrap up my points. I'm just going to echo the points of Chaz and Fergus. I agree with all of those. But I also want to revisit my original point and say that sequels of certain franchises, you don't have to keep upping the stakes. It doesn't need to be world ending to universe ending. Keep the stakes personal. Keep the stories personal. That's where it really, really works for me.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Actually, sometimes low key personal is better. I think that's a good way to go about it. And wow, that was a very interesting, scripted episode. Well, we don't usually script them anyway, but we usually have a bit more of a running order. But this has been an interesting topic today, and it's been one of our very loosest discussions, and I think it's worked out quite well, to be honest. Like a good hour and 40-ish minute episode, so it's actually quite good, to be honest, looking at the time frame once it's been edited. But no, that's it, people, and in the episode we are now doing the outro. So if you've got any questions, queries, or compliments, or are there any film sequels that we've missed that you feel like are great, like possibly the Hannibal movies, for example, Silence of the Lambs, Red Dragon, and everything? We never spoke about horror movies to as big of a degree. Send those in to us at nmipodcastoutlook.com. That's nmipodcastoutlook.com. Follow our socials, Twitter and Instagram at NMIcast. Or if you literally just search on Google NMIcast, we will automatically be pretty much the top search on there. So that's pretty awesome, to be honest. So I've been your host, Nate. It's been a lovely pleasure to have you here today. Look for us on our next episode, which is going to be the John Wick 4 review. That's going to be very interesting to see. Obviously, this movie is running in at almost 3 hours long. Can it carry us for almost 3 hours? That'll be the interesting thing. And how tired are we going to be at the end of the movie if it doesn't stop for 3 hours? And then after that, we are going to be doing the sequels to video games episode. So that'll be very interesting indeed, springboarding off of movies. So that'll be our next episode to people. But I've been your host, Nate. I'd like to thank Chaz, Fergus, and James for joining me again today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Great discussion. Excellent. As always.
Yes, and that's it's lovely to speak to all today again, people. It's lovely to see you all out there. I'm your host, Nate. Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.